Hi, everyone. We're happy to have you here at Portal Talks. And now we have the API session with Mark Boyd, who's founder and director of Platformable, which is a startup focused on supporting open ecosystems, and Aidan O'Connor, our very own solutions engineer and API catalog portal expert, which will be showing us some stuff. So Mark, the floor is yours. Talk to us about API governance, Platformable, and let's begin.
Hey everyone, welcome. So I'm Mark Boyd, as Ronnie has said. Thanks, Ronnie, for the introduction. I use the pronouns he and him, and I'm here. Looking forward to hearing from you too, Aidan as well. Okay, so I'll be talking about lightweight API governance and what does that mean for platform engineering and for internal developer portals. I say lightweight API governance because often when we think about the word governance in itself scares people off. Immediately you think, oh, this is going to be a bureaucratic process. It's going to hold people down to where we won't be able to ship our features or our products or our APIs because it's got to go through some sort of vetting and review system and so on. So what we want to do when we say lightweight is we want to make it as automated as possible. And we also want to make sure that we're finding the right balance between generating value from APIs and the applications and workflows that they produce and being robust and consistent with how we design the APIs so that we can build more APIs and people will immediately get them. So what we're going to cover I've said 30 minutes, we're going to try and do it in 25. What's the developer flow like when you build new APIs? What's the ideal developer flow? What resources can support you? What tools can help with automating all of your sort of software development lifecycle stages when you're thinking about APIs? There's a couple of assumptions I'm making about how this would all work, and then we'll touch very briefly on where we think platform engineering will go. I've said in 2023, and I should update that to 2024 or 2025 maybe already. Okay, what's the developer flow like when you build new APIs? When I've shared a similar sort of presentation like this in live events, it's really been great to have people call out. So use your chat function to be able to say, this is where I'm at, or this strikes a chord. So please, as interactive as possible. Ronnie's going to interrupt me if you've got a question about anything that I'm presenting so that we can answer that as we go. So, okay, the API user needs something. So maybe there is already an API in your catalog and they've asked for an additional feature. Maybe they've asked for an additional type of API with new functionality. Then normally the solution architect decides the best way to provide that. And they're saying, okay, the best way to do this is via an API in this case. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it might be that they're providing some other way maybe it's just a one-off data request and it's just easier to send you a data blob or something. But, often it'll be, okay, well, we need a new feature added to our API or we need a new API. So then as a developer, you're told, build the API. We're probably already all fine with that as far as we go now. But does the product manager get involved at this stage, or is it still a technical issue? The reason why you would want the product manager involved is really to sort of think about, okay, what are all the potential business cases and use cases for this API? What knowledge do we have if that was an API user that we've worked with or we've provided APIs to before? What do we know about what systems they have, what their pain points, what their needs are that we might need to take into consideration when building the API? Maybe the product manager actually has a list of support questions or what pages of software document or of API documentation people would find useful and so on. So there's, some product manager could be involved there. Sometimes we see it, sometimes we don't. Then we sort of ask, okay, so now maybe you've had an outreach with your product manager and get there involved. In any case, you get to the next stage where you're designing you're designing the API. Do you use any specific tooling? Do you write an API specification first? Again, how involved is the product manager in that sort of process? And here we're sort of saying, okay, well, we've got maybe we've got an API specification. We're designing the API. It's going to call a number of data points. So for example, we need user accounts in the API, and we need to understand what data is going to be called about a user's account. Do you just think, oh, okay, I've got to build a user account data model for this API. So let's think, we'll need first name, last name, email, and organization. Okay, great. That's what I'll add there. Or do you go to a catalog of all of your object schema and look up your user account data model and drop that in to your API specification, for example? You'd be surprised at what the answer is there. Okay, and then when and how do you, after you've done all of those sorts of things, you're building out the API, and then when and how do you check that the API meets all your security and regulatory requirements? Who do you even ask about that? Do you have some checklists? Does it need to go through some sort of security review process? What happens there to make sure that your API is going to be robust enough for production use cases? So really, they're the sorts of issues that rise up when you're designing and building an API. I think that hopefully everyone can agree with that. If not, then jump in on the chat now and let us know things that I've missed. We're also just cutting it down to fit with the time. So overall, what you're wanting to do, you can see at all of those questions that we've asked at those various stages. The issue is that, here, hang on, gone too far ahead. The issue is that at each one of those questions that I'm asking there, it takes you out of your flow as a developer. So you're then having to see either about, oh, the product manager's not in the room. Let's have a meeting with the product manager. Oh, what data objects do I need? Well, in that case, I've got to stop designing the API and have a look and figure out what APIs. Oh, what's the security and regulatory requirements? I've got to go away and find out all of those before I can proceed with testing. So really, you want to try to keep development in the flow. It's more enjoyable for your work if you're not having to stop it every 10 minutes, half an hour, every couple of hours to be able to check and get this additional information. So overall, does that mean, you know, as a developer, you're happy with your work because you're able to just sit there and get into the flow and enjoy building? Are costs reduced from a business point of view? Is the time length it takes to build a new API slowing down? Because as people are sort of building, they've got to run away and grab all of these additional elements as well. And overall, I guess related to that cost reduction and the additional costs that it takes, does that mean that the time to market is speeding up because you're able to get this API out there and earning revenue, or building out partnership relationships, or automating workflows faster because you've been able to get that API completed and through all of your testing environments and so on? Okay, so at Platformable, what we've done is we've come up with a model that looks at the API governance best practices. And we've sort of aligned this with the software development lifecycle, which you can see at the top here. We're going to go through this in detail, so I won't describe it too much here, but you can see from the left-hand side, we've got sort of API design elements from project kickoff and requirements gathering and initial analysis. Then we get into the actual API development, which is the design and the testing stages, and then the deployment, which is the deployment and the maintenance stages if you're aligning it with the software development lifecycle process. And so on the left-hand side, we've got our API design in the blue, and let's talk quickly about some of those issues. Okay, so here, the sort of API governance processes or components that might be useful for doing this is being able to understand the API developer journeys, understanding the API user, and then there's some ideas around paved roads and some organizational structures, which we've called team topologies here, based on some of that groundbreaking work that's been done. But what really here, so you're sort of seeing that APIs actually really do come from a wider business process, or, you know, the whole strategy process. But out of that, then you want to first of all look at your developer personas, and that's where that product manager might be able to help you. And here we've said that there are three sorts of artifacts or tools that might help you here along the way. So first is the developer personas, where you're actually looking at anything you know about the sort of users that you're trying to build the APIs for. You might look at the previous feedback that you've received, or requests for new features and so on, or requests for how would you adapt an API to a particular environment. And then you also might look at your analytics review, which is that point I mentioned earlier around the sorts of, API documentation pages, or maybe what are the most common error problems people have with APIs and so on. So you're getting a feel for, okay, if you build this new API or additional functionality on an existing API, how would users adapt that or integrate that into their work? You've got some data and information that can help you in that. And some of that you might decide, okay, no, that's a whole new project. We're not going to look at that in this API, but we'll put that aside. So you can sort of rank your needs there, and then you incorporate what you decide as far as the decision around what you're creating in the API. So, there are some things you can do. I think I'm a big fan of API use case descriptions. So before you build an API, you actually write out what all of the use cases for the API are. You can do it as a press release. So you could imagine, okay, we've got this API, it's being released now. And so you write a press release imagining, okay, here's how you're saying it's going to be used and what the opportunities and the value that's being generated from it are. So out of doing all of that, you sort of get an idea of, okay, this is the boundaries of the project. And then using those persona templates, perhaps you've got developer personas already in your organization. How easy are they though to find? So, it'd be really great if there was one common resource where you could go, like a wiki or something like that, that would have all of these things. And in fact, Matthew Skelton from Team Topologies has suggested that maybe actually the start of all of this stuff is really just a high quality wiki where you're storing all of this information in the one place. And we'll hear about developer portals and internal developer portals later, but all of that sort of stuff I would see would be something that would be great to have in an internal developer portal, access to all of those, whether that's links to the wiki or stored in the portal as a sort of section in itself. Then you've also got your golden paths. So a lot of these sorts of APIs that are being built, they're similar ones to ones that have been already built. So in that case, you really should have like the startup environment that you would be using to build an API, which might include a user seed for an API design tool, some sort of acknowledgement of the linters that you would use, all sorts of things that might go together as far as this is the sort of toolkit that we'll use for building the APIs. But then in addition, there might be other rules as well that help you build out and get started faster, rather than seeing every new project as starting from scratch and having to pull all of that stuff together. We don't really have time to go over the Team Topologies work, and it looks like my screen's, there we go. But there are sort of four sort of sub-teams, if you like, in the organizational structure that Team Topologies recommends. Highly recommend reading their work. We've found in the past that what had happened with APIs is that they've been decentralized into each line of business. And so each line of business was building their own APIs. But the problem with that is that then every single line of business is doing things slightly differently, because they're only drawing on the knowledge from within their team, when they're in fact things like that user account model, data model that I mentioned earlier. That might be something that all line of business teams will be able to use consistently across the organization. Some of the rules around the security and the regulatory compliance would matter for all line of business teams, for example. So then being able to move those to like a platform team that's documenting and supporting each line of business to be able to use these sorts of common data models, common approaches, and then maybe an enabling team that is helping each line of business team to be able to do things like incorporate those data models, how to use the API design lifecycle tooling that's offered, and so on. So there is this sort of this model. What we've found, I often say APIs are the tail wagging the dog, because, often what happens is that API is how you approach the API will mean changes to the whole business. Luckily, I think what we're seeing is that shift from line of business, decentralized team has shifted along the lines of the team topologies model, where a lot more now have at least some sort of platform and enabling team in place that's supporting the line of business team, or the streamline team, as team topologies calls it. But so then thinking about, okay, who is going to be responsible for helping support the replication of standards and of approaches to building APIs across different teams. I'll come back to that point in a minute. Let's have a quick look at the design team. I know I'm going through getting a lot done here in the 25 minutes. I really want to walk you through the model and have you thinking about what's available to you when you're thinking about API governance.
If you need another 5 or 7 minutes, you have them. So if anything is worth explaining, we'd love to listen.
Thanks, Ronnie. That's very generous. Okay, so then you've got that, you've signed off, you understand the user needs, you're ready to start building the APIs. We then suggest that that's the time to meet with your security expertise and possibly your regulatory compliance as well. Let's make DevSecOps, first order business of your API design, rather than, seeing the security people as blockers who are going to prevent shipping. So then you avoid going to them until the very last minute. And then you're saying, well, we've really got to get this out the door now. So do your review quickly, sort of thing. If we speak to them up front, then, we can incorporate their advice and their recommendations in from the beginning. I know it's easier than it sounds. I've got projects at the moment where we've worked on regulatory alignment, and the regulatory experts are like, oh, well, you can't say that because of regulations and so on. Then they're not giving us alternatives, so, and we've got to get on with building. So, I get that, it's very easy to say, let's talk with them up front and then we'll get their input and then we can start building with it. It's sometimes a much longer conversation, and over a course of a number of APIs, you'll be trying to build out those relationships to help them understand your timeline needs as well. One thing that does help is having some sort of checklist, or if you can incorporate it into style guides. There's a great website, API Stylebook, which has got a whole collection of different API style guides that you can have a look at. But even if you're a solution architect that's trying to build out your API governance program, look at your APIs that you've got internally. What are some of the consistent ways people are currently building APIs? And are there some core rules, from best practices around building APIs that you can incorporate as well? Resources having plural nouns and things like that, where you can incorporate those into a sort of mini style guide and then start building it out more as you go. And then the other elements that might help you with API governance at this stage is having a taxonomy, having an API catalog, which will be an internal developer portal, and then using an API design tool. I'm going to talk about Stoplight, which is now owned by SmartBear. But overall, one of the key issues I want to talk about is inner source. And inner source we see on the latest platform engineering hype cycle from Gartner. Inner source is coming up in the middle. I think it's got a 5-year trajectory. We're not yet at the trough of disillusionment, because I just don't think people are using it enough. There's some inner source usage out there. I think it's got great potential, and it's going to have to be the way we work collaboratively together. But it takes a different type of initiative, and some of our organizational cultures might not be suited to really doing that. But it's kind of like an extension, if you think about it as an extension of documentation and architecture decision records, maybe. So what you could do is actually on your wikis or when you're releasing stuff, is just talk about where why you've made some of the decisions you've made, how you can use it. One of the things for developers I think I don't see enough of is the sort of proactive reaching out to other colleagues. So if you're building something in your team and it's got a search functionality, and you have a look and you notice that someone's built something with an API with a search functionality in another line of business, do you email or contact them or meet up with them to ask them about how they made some of the decisions that they made in the API there? So, like having that, and that really is in a source. That's all it is that sort of approach of like trying to share your knowledge and seeking out and learning from others within your organization and further afield. Ronnie, have we got a question?
Yes, one is mine, and the other is from somebody that's on the webinar. So my question is inner source and in your discussion of wiki and also discoverability of APIs in general, especially when you're not doing the right stuff, team topology style. So do all of these get solved by an API catalog? So I just can see all APIs in the organization and kind of maybe overcome my discoverability inner source. Maybe I'm more likely to email the owner of that API if I can find them in a catalog. Is that something you're thinking about? You don't
Absolutely.
have to hop to the plug for port. And then the other question is when you're talking about this part of the process, the design, maybe testing and deploying to production, how much of that you're describing kind of this entire solution and problem area. How much of that can be automated? This is the question we got from the should be automated and can be automated, and some of it and what of it is still more about processes and dialogue and product ownership.
Yeah. Great question. And thanks for bringing me back online. The question from the participant, because I should speak up a bit more about the automated aspect of all of this. So with but answering Ronnie's question first, yes, there's a number of tools here. We've got Backstage, Maya Platform, API Share, and of course, Port, all offer some sort of API catalog in some way in an internal developer portal. I'm looking forward to hearing Aidan share about Port's particular strengths as a portal. I feel like not only should it be the API catalog, though, it should be some other resources. So that you would have, so for example, in an API catalog, you might have the API, and then on that page describing it, you would have the use case description, who the product manager is internally and the technical lead is, and their email addresses. Even it would be great to just have, one click to connect with them or to, Slack message them or something like that directly from there. So you're staying in your flow, using the portal as almost your sort of your working desk. So there'd be that. I'd love to see a calendar on a portal which says for internally what all of the APIs that are planned to be produced for the rest of the year, for example, are, so that before you start on yours, you can see if there are any other line of business APIs that might have some similarity to yours that you would do. And then also you could have sort of scribble notes or pages that describe certain aspects of the APIs or what you've learned or how you're going to approach it and all of that sort of stuff. You would have the style guide there as a tool. And then coming to the question around automation, Kin Lane and I spoke the other week, really great resource. I would recommend keeping up with apievangelist.com and reading all of his work, basically, really fantastic. He was talking about, even with the developer persona, you could have that as a data model and a set of questions or, a survey, if you like, turn that into YAML so that when you're actually building the API, you can test your API against some of those aspects of the developer persona. So you can even automate how well your API design is meeting the needs of your identified users. The style guide is really important for this as well, because here you can see, test specification or design, must be in the, now here you go. Use API design linter to ensure consistent application of style guide. So what you want to do is get to a point where you've got your style guide, you put those style guide rules into a linter like Spectral, which is an open source tool. Make that discoverable on your internal developer portal. So once people are up to the stage of they've built the API, they go to the linter tool, run their API through the design of the API through their linter, and then they see a list of where it's not conforming to your style guide, and immediately you can start addressing those. And maybe then you get to a point where it's also automatic, where you can then clear off that you can sign off on a review process because it's passed all of these linter rules, which have been previously decided. One other aspect of this that I really like from a automation point of view is that there's tools like 42 Crunch that can also assess your your Open API specification. It's going through a bit too fast. So you've got Spectral that can help you with enforcing your style guides, and something like 42 Crunch that can do an automated security review of your API as well, and alert you to any of the changes that need to be, or the edits that you can make to your API so it's more robust from a security point of view. And if you've also got security rules from your internal security team in your style guide and therefore in your Spectral linter, then maybe that's also another opportunity to just check off the automation processes for your API. And maybe you can even move straight to deployment from having all of those reviews being done. Maybe there's one that's higher risk because it's got personally identifiable information or something like that, and maybe that needs to go through a more rigorous, perhaps manual review. But then other APIs that are just for internal applications or for common functionalities, maybe those ones can just get passed as long as they've passed the Spectral linter process, the 42 Crunch, and the Spectral has been built to all of your style guides.
Yeah, somebody's messaging me all the time, thinking about it from an internal developer portal point of view, you can actually automate some of these during the creation of the API, but you can also set scorecards and check whether the APIs comply with these standards later on, or even rate them. So when they're discoverable, you actually can, at a quick glance, know whether they're compliant or rogue APIs that should not be running around in your organization at all. So portals can also be a way to enforce standards and promote them.
I love that. One of the things I find is that we should be trying to get to a point where before we build something, we are saying, has this been built before? Have we? I think sometimes we jump straight into the building of something that we forget to say, oh, hang on a second, what have we already got? What's already got this functionality? Who have we already built? What APIs have we already built for this audience? What data models have we already used in the past? And I think instead what we quite often do is, in our rush, we just get the back of an envelope and we quickly note down a data model that we think will work for what we want to build, when it's actually easier to be able to just have a look at, okay, what other times have we used a user account? I keep going to that one as the example. And that's where, in a source, if we can share those practices a bit more, I think that sort of builds up a new approach. And I don't think it takes away the creative aspect of the work. You still get to actually build more interesting and build more robust APIs without having to reinvent the wheel each time you go.
Yeah, so, you use the inner source for discoverability, but you can also use additional portal functions to see that whatever you discovered during your inner source project, whether it's good or bad or compliant. And if not, maybe you apply the innovation, actually making it better.
Exactly. And I think that's sort of a good place I'll wrap up here. I'll just show the last few as I wrap up, but I think it would be really great to hear from Aidan now. This is the model for API governance. Then what I'm interested in hearing then is how Port takes something like this sort of model and shows that Port's got the features to enable all of these sorts of functionalities to happen. So, can you store the developer persona template somewhere or assist with that? Is there functionality where people can share their experiences of building the APIs? Has it got the API catalog elements so you can quickly find, and can you find it by taxonomy? Can you actually look for all of your APIs internally that have had that search functionality so that you can compare how others have built search into their APIs, for example, But finally, just before we do that, Aidan, just to go through this final stage then. So you've got the API governance. It could be a manual review, or hopefully, you know, a lot of these could be automated if you've done the LinkedIn and the security reviews. And then it's pushed almost automatically into deployment. And then you're doing some of the product manager type tasks. You're setting up the analytics, which will then feed back into your next API that you're building to be able to share some analytics on how developers are using this API, as well as some analytics on your internal developer portal as far as how people came across finding this API in your internal catalog and so on. You add it to the internal and perhaps an external developer portal if it's an outward-facing API. You can publish your minimum standards of documentation. We often do at least a sort of Swagger Hub type interactive documentation based off an open API specification, as well as an authentication explanation of how to authenticate for an API, and then a sort of getting started guide and a use case description. So at the minimum, we see those four, and then you can build out more developer resource assets beyond that as well, of course. And then the product manager has a roadmap, the technical lead has a roadmap, and hopefully they're meeting regularly. I've seen some great examples of okay. And just final thoughts. If you are interested in other developer portals, you can use API Landscape to find out a whole range of the different services that are available for API design lifecycle tooling, for linters, for API testing, and so on. So there's a whole range of tools you can look at there. And we know Port's well mentioned on the appropriate categories for all of that. And as far as publishing your roadmap, I love what Nordea Bank do. They're using a Trello board to talk about their APIs and how they're what the features are for the future for their APIs. So I really love that. We won't get into analytics. We have run out of time a little bit. One final thing, though, is, and this, I think people will have, I'd love to hear Aidan's thoughts on this as well, is this is all great. This workflow, you know, the best practices, they all work. We've seen it work, but it only works if someone's responsible internally for pulling together the style guide, making sure that product managers are involved, treating the internal catalog portal as a product. So having someone who is helping make sure that teams are listing their APIs, you know, encouraging that inner source approach and so on. And then also making sure that, and also the other sort of assumption in all of this is that while we've shown it as a sort of a linear process, it might be that you've already done great work on the style guide, but you haven't done work on the linter, or you've done work on the linter and the style guide, but you haven't done work on the developer persona. So it's not thinking that you've got to do this in order. You can sort of think about your maturity in the API governance framework and then go and work on the elements that best suit you. And my final thought is where we see platform engineering is, as the model shows, it's like that business policy of like thinking about an ecosystem-based business model. So you're thinking about all of your developers externally and all of your lines of business. You're reorienting your teams towards that team topology approach. You're focusing on the internal developer experience. You're looking at API governance. You're doing the data governance from the data models, and then you've got the DevOps part as well, as far as making sure that all of your APIs are performant. And all of that together is what we would call platform engineering. So a real quick rush through as far as all of this goes, but I want to hear now about how it all gets applied in the real world. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Mark.
That's
go ahead, Aidan.
Yeah, phenomenal presentation. I think we all do a big virtual round of applause for Mark. Thank you very much. Great thought put into that. With what time we have left, I want to show you how you can use an internal developer portal to maximize what Mark's put together here. So I have a couple of things I want to show. The first being having a catalog and an easily searchable catalog. So you can answer that first question that Mark came up with, which is there an API out there that does what I needed to do? Are there endpoints where I might overlap that maybe I could use? So encouraging that inner source. Next thing I want to show is self-service. So again, a lot of them Mark talked about, like style guides, adding 42 crunch spectral. if developers have to go think about this and deliberately add it, there's room for error. So I think what I want to show you here is self-service. You abstract all that away so that developers do what they do best and what we want them doing, which is writing the code that backs these APIs. And then finally, I'll give you a brief overview into technical documentation, scorecards, some dashboards, right up until the moment that Ronnie gives me the cane and asks me to get off stage. So I'll start with this. So a nice view to land on as a developer, right? Gives you a little bit of left and right limits of what's provided in this portal. Something personalized also right here in the middle. What APIs do I work on? And if that works well for your developers, if they forget or if they need kind of quick links from the beginning, this is a good view. But everything you're seeing here is customizable. On the left side, especially if you're introducing new design guides, having some references to developers to be able just to go look at these things. Okay, what is involved in this API design guide? How do I get perfect marks on this scorecard that I'm going to be graded on? And then finally on the right side, some quick actions. I'm going to save those for a little bit from now, but just really easy things you can go do in the IDP here. So catalog first. Like Mark was talking about, maintaining that global catalog that's automatically updated. And the advantage here is not just that you can go find an API, learn more about it, but the real business value you're getting out of this is that product managers and developers alike are able to find out if something already exists. So this kind of assumes by looking at this global API catalog that you know the name of the API that you're looking for. But in very large organizations that we work with, that's not always the case. So I'm going to go back home. I'm going to assume the developer knows nothing. And what I can do instead is use our global search, which is a federated search, going to go through not only the API titles, but the documentation, the endpoints, anything involved in our IDP, and I'm going to be able to find that. So what I'm looking for, I've been asked to build this, maybe a recommendation service. And instead of recreating an API endpoint where I need to go find the product that I'm looking for to recommend, I'm going to search, has somebody already done this to save me at least a few hours? It looks like they have. So we have an endpoint here. And I'm able to go kind of search upstream with that. Okay, so we have this endpoint. There's a couple parameters required. I can learn more about it. I'm not seeing an owning team. Maybe we should fix that. And then I can go upstream of that to the API, right? So this is the recommendation API. I can get a good idea of who owns it. Maybe you could have a subject matter expert. And maybe also there are different versions I could use. So I should find that out. I can go to the versions page and see, okay, we've got a couple versions of a couple different APIs. So it really brings you as an API developer from knowing nothing and needing to go search to being able to use this API well. And that's what I want to get into next. So if I stumble across an API that I need to use, and again, this is all from the perspective of just using APIs we already have. I can go to a few things. I have the README. This might not be populated yet, but README, Swagger, Open API spec. You can have that all integrated here, so that a developer again stumbles upon this API or one of its endpoints, and they're able to go figure out precisely how to use this very quickly. And if they can't figure it out, they can go talk to the right person who owns and maintains it. Another presentation of this view, my APIs. This assumes I'm on both teams that are depicted here, but obviously, this can be dynamically filtered based on the logged in user. So I have all these APIs available. I know that I can go review my work. So as someone requested a new endpoint for this API, and I can have that all collected here. So again, I have just one place rather than multiple systems to go to. Again, I touched on API versions, endpoints, being able to very quickly kind of centralize all of this API documentation, figure out how to use it. But the next thing I want to get into is scaffolding a new one. So again, following that path of the developer who just found out that there's no API that does what I needed to do. So I need to go scaffold one. And what's important, what Mark brought up, is being able to do this to standard from the beginning without much thought or effort from the developer. So I could do that here. There's another page I'll show you, but I'm going to go to self-service just to show this off a little bit. I want to create a new API. Again, we're asking for minimal input from the developer. We are automating a lot of this. So I'm going to say, let's say that this one probably exists, but we'll say user management API. I get to pick the protocol. Let's say, for example, we're moving towards a standard of all APIs should be REST. We don't want to use SOAP or RPC anymore. If you can create dynamic permissions that say if someone goes and selects RPC or SOAP, this now has to go to someone for approval. So building in those automations to ensure that all of this is the standard from the beginning. We want to make sure that we have a good use case description, no undocumented APIs out there. So we'll say this API is for managing users. Obviously, we'd probably want a little bit more than that, but we would also be able to direct the user into selecting API design guide. We've got 3 approved design guides in this made up organization I have. And it says here already, spectral linter will be added for the selected style guide. So again, developer doesn't have to think about that. I'm going to go and I'm going to select the Google API design guide. I'll select the business domain this serves and the owning team. So we have ownership of these APIs from the beginning. And then if you have thoughts about, I've investigated this, I know the up and downstream APIs, you can go select one, you can go select a few, and then we can go execute this. And what this is going to do in the background is it's just going to go and automatically create this. It's going to create a new repository, going to scaffold some new basic open API spec. It's going to add the 42 crunch, the linter, and going to be able to do that for you. Got a couple other self-service actions here. So when you actually want to deploy an API to a gateway, you can do that. Select the API you want to deploy and actually select the gateway. Execute that, enrich an API. Let's say we implement an API, an internal developer portal for this. Everything before the creation of this, where you only go through create new API self-service action, now needs a lot more information because developers haven't been forced into it from the beginning. So as a developer, you can go and enrich it. Hey, I'm enriching this service with a little bit more information about it so that everyone's aware of what it serves, what it does, is it deprecated. Another option, creating a cloud resource so that developers don't have to go find Terraform, find the approved module, let them select what they need, and don't give them too many options, right? We all know Terraform Cloud, there's so many levers you can pull. We really just want to direct them to say, we've already thought of this for you. You just need this thing, so go and deploy it, and we hand that off to them. I know I got like 2 minutes left, so I'm gonna hurry up with dashboards here. So
hurry up, you guys are making me
no
feel
need.
guilty. No,
No,
that's
no, no, no. I'm just trying to be respectful of time. So API maturity. Let's say you're the SVP of engineering over all of these APIs, and you start using an IDP. And before this, you might have had a manual process for determining kind of quality of these APIs. But what you want to do is have it a little bit more automatic, and you want to be able to drive initiatives off of these. So what we can do, as one of the attendees said, is scorecards, right? So API maturity. So I'm able to tell at a high level, based on these scorecards that I put together, what is mature, what is not, what needs some work. So I can see that I have 8 gold level APIs, right? And all of that is customizable, what goes into that. And then I could see it by team. So I know that, hey, perhaps the experimental APIs team needs some attention. They need some work. Mission critical is doing pretty well. So I can just go to the experimental team and say, for these reasons, let's say you need to go add some readmes. You need to use a supported language. I know it's experimental, but we have some Python experts and we want to stick with our area of expertise, right? Team ownership looks like we're doing pretty well. But the idea here is that you can go from needing to go find all this out, calling the APIs and gathering this information, or you can have it automated here and then have these checks that you can continue adding to if you'd like. So I think we have another view here of your API dashboard. Okay, what's internal, what's external, what's not even marked yet. Perhaps we drive an initiative on this. And that's another thing you can do in Port. You could say everyone needs to go identify whether your API is internal or external. Production readiness, I believe this is kind of a default scorecard, but what I want to get to now is API docs. So like Mark was bringing up, just having a wiki, kind of goes a long way for developers. What's our style guide? Maybe we use design guide put out by somebody else, some best practice. Well, what is our style guide? So I cheated a little bit here. I put in the Port documentation, but the idea here is that you can present these internal documents that aren't related to any individual API or service, and let developers, again, have a single place to go to find out what are our standards, what are my APIs, what APIs are available to me, and how well am I performing against the standards in my organization. And then external API wiki. We're likely not just going to use our own APIs we've developed. We might depend on something that we don't actually control. So having that all brought in here could be very useful to a developer. I think the final thing I want to show, it's a little bit out of order, but there was a lot going on in this create new API. This might not be something that happens every day. And I think based on what Mark has been saying, it's kind of a planned process. So you might not know all of this right away. You might not know which design guide you're going to go with. So having a catalog page where you can go there and kind of have a little bit more information about what should go into this API, what will be automated for me, who do I need to talk to if I want to create a SOAP API or something like that. This can give more information. I included very minimal information here, but kind of helps the developer to figure out what am I going to need to input when I click this create button to have the scope be successful, and what kind of permissions will I need to get to be able to create something that might be out of standard from the beginning. So I'm going to reiterate what we did here today. So we started with the catalog, the customizability, presenting what a developer based on who is logged in can see, what actions are available, documentation, global search that'll find not just the title of an API, but maybe also its endpoint, maybe something in the documentation. Talked a lot about documentation and self-service actions to create these things from standard. And then finally talked about standards. So scorecards, customizability, ensuring that all of your APIs are up to standard and that you can then raise the levels while APIs by monitoring that and driving initiatives on it. Talked a lot. Are we seeing any questions?
Thank you, Aiden. I loved it. And I have a challenging question to you, Mark. So instead of saying, wow, I liked it, which is kind of not interesting, what feature request would you make to Aiden after you've seen all of this?
I think from my point of view, I mean, I really love it. I love the feature, features that you've got made available. I would love to have where you could start with that API governance framework. And actually, because it's a fair few of those components are in there, maybe not the persona template stuff. So there's not a natural place where that could sit at the moment. It seems that's not tied to your APIs unless you put it in the wiki that's the internal wiki and had a section of that wiki. But I'd love to elevate it a little bit more so that you're able to link the technical with the business, because elevating that developer persona brings you back to some of those, why are we doing this? To give value to the end user sort of thing. And so elevate that a bit more. But I mean, I think there's a future in like being able to show how one of the things with that governance model is we wanted to look at maybe an app that lets you check off and see where all of those resources are. But there's no need for us to build that app because Port could be that app. It's sort of, you can see at a glance where you are with doing all of that maturity, sort of thing. So really great stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, and point well taken. There's a lot left to be done. And again, treating your portal like a product, you take that kind of feedback from management, from developers, and you improve it always.
Yeah. The other one, just thinking, is the analytics, which we didn't get to talk about today. But yeah, I'm sure there'll be other talks coming up over the next 2 days that will touch on that.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much, Aiden. We will send the recording as well to anybody that's registered to Portal Talks. And great that you could make it and talk to us today.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks again for the invite. Great to be working with you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Ciao.